Sorry about
Yeah.
that, doctor. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm a pediatrician from Leavenworth, Kansas. I was raised in Washington D.C. Was born in Littleton, North Carolina, though.
Hmm.
Went to grade school and high school in Washington D.C. A good old alma mater, McKinley High School, and went to Howard University pharmacy school initially, and finished that, and then went on to medical school at the University of Kansas, and got my degree in 1977, rather. And I did 2 years of pediatric residency at DC General Hospital in Washington, D.C., and then another year at the University of Texas at Houston for a pediatric infectious disease fellowship, just a 1 year fellowship in that. And I came back to Kansas, to Leavenworth, Kansas in 1980, and have been here since then, doing general pediatrics. So that's kind of where I am now. And I like doing what I do. I enjoy educating parents and the public about medicine and pediatrics specifically.
Well, I'm very excited that you're here. And again, I want to tell you it's an honor and a privilege to meet you and that you're allowing this time. I do appreciate it so much. Um, Mental health disorders is an emerging problem. According to the statistics, it's between 20 to 40% of all health interventions are affected by these disorders. Can you briefly outline the most prominent disorders affecting children, such as depression, anxiety, ADD, post-traumatic stress, phobias, and obsession compulsion disorder? And then I want to ask you something else, and I know it may not relate to it, but to me it does in a certain way. The effect that bullying affects a child. And
Yeah.
I've been noticing that's happening more than lately. The child seems to come more reserved and within, and the
Mm.
parents really don't know how to deal with it besides trying to teach the child how to fight back. So if you, I know that wasn't on our list, but if you could just kind of
Mm.
touch upon that, that would help me greatly. Thank you so much.
Well, we'll do the bullying first, since that's gonna be down the line. So let's just tackle that one.
Okay.
Bullying is a huge problem. All of us have witnessed throughout your work, or either school, or
Come
just
on.
lifetime in the community, where
Mm-hmm.
people simply take advantage of their size, or they can take advantage of their economics to use it to their advantage, to make you feel uncomfortable, or even to harm you physically, and
Yes.
occasionally physically
Yes.
harm.
Yes.
Um, it's an unfortunate event that kids who go to school have to deal with that. I, the biggest thing I think is that to raise your kids to be somewhat resilient, so that they can withstand stress that comes from out, especially things they can't control all the time. But my biggest thing is, and I'll be honest with you, is it's the community and the parents and the school that have to do that. The parents of the bullier and the parents of the bullyee both have to kind of work to understand that if you're the parent that has the child that's doing the bullying, that's going to down the line cause him significant distress. Every study suggests that they don't benefit from that at all, and it's not good for them at all. And the person, of course, who gets the bullying done to them, they get loss of self-esteem,
Come
and
on.
really feel really bad, and often will have long-term consequences there. But I do fault, I hate to say fault, but I do fault the school system to some degree, in that it's often just simply not addressed at a high enough level. Most of us realize that when the chief says this isn't going to be done, and the chief, enforces that, things don't get done.
Say
But with
that.
bullying,
Say
but
that.
yeah, but when bullying happens, often what happens is that people think, oh, it's just a little thing. It's not really that bad. It's not going to
Mm-mm.
hurt anybody. But I think a lot of it's just, unfortunately, they're not willing to really want to get involved, and really go in and become part of the change that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's busy, but when it comes down to our kids, we need to understand that if we don't protect them early, then the consequences will show up later. And
Thank
so
you.
And so the key thing I think is that the school needs to be made a very safe haven, and often that's
Mm,
the case because some of these kids come from homes that are in turmoil,
yeah,
and stuff like that.
yeah.
And sometimes that's their safety place. That is the safest place they're going to be all day.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
If you
mm-hmm.
go, so I think it's important that the schools take that into consideration, and that become more a part of what teaching is. I know they need the 3 hours of reading, writing, arithmetic, but it also should be, they should socially and psychologically they should be prepared to deal with the aspects of bullying and make that a priority,
Come
not
on.
something that's extra, but a
Yeah,
priority that
yeah.
needs to be done on a daily basis. Because when you preach that, if you sit on that pulpit and you preach that this is not going to happen, and then you say, John, when you do this, this is what's going to happen, and you
Mm-hmm.
follow up on it,
Yeah,
then it's going to get done. I
yeah.
know from my own experience that when you consider this a priority and you take that into consideration and you
Mm-hmm.
follow up on it, things will change. It's just unfortunate that that's still not
A
being done
priority.
on
Yeah,
it's not a priority. And
yeah,
so I think
yeah.
for parents and for schools, they need to take it seriously. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's no magic bullet. It's just that, like, poverty and many other things that we know exist that need to be changed, and we know how to
Yeah,
do it. We just
yeah.
simply sometimes don't do it. Get off our butts, get in there and
Get
get
it
the work done.
done. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree
and
with you
it's
wholeheartedly. Yeah,
yeah, it'll save
yeah.
our children in the
Yeah,
long
it's
run.
important. It's important.
It's
And I
important.
see it. I see it in the kids, and they shut down when you try to talk to them about it. Or the first thing you say, well, did you tell the teacher? Did you do this? But here in Louisiana, I don't know everywhere else, there is a no bullying, policy in force in the schools. Now, like you said, the chief says so, but it doesn't mean that the Indians carry it out. You
Right.
were
Yeah.
so true on that. So true. So
Yeah.
true. But I appreciate that. And it gives
Hmm.
me more drive to reinforce the parents of the child that's being bullied to make sure that the school is notified about it. We cannot let the child suffer and then he just shuts down and he does nothing but just sulk.
Right. Well, it leads to all these other problems that we're going to talk about in mental health.
Okay.
First, talk about depression. And
All right.
okay, depression is a mood disorder that's caused by a persistent feeling of sadness or loss of interest. It's
Mm-hmm.
caused by stressful events. We just talked about one of those. And when you get bullied or something like that, that certainly can lead to it.
Okay.
Some people just simply have a family history, and it's genetically kind of inbred that they're going to have this problem. Their body
Wow.
simply is set up that genetically you simply are predisposed to not producing the type of chemicals in your brain that keep
Come
your
on.
mood elevated. Yes, and so that's something and that's really significant because I see it very often. If the mom's depressed or the dad's depressed, or occasionally when they're both, those numbers go from, like, in general population, we'll say it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 20% of the people at some point will be depressed. But when
Wow.
you look at a family history, especially if both parents are, you're looking well over 50%, of that. And so you need to be aware of that ahead of time. So you're looking for those things, screen for it early, treat the kids early before they get in trouble, and stuff like that.
Wow.
Okay. So, but
Okay.
that's one of the things that family history can we know that exists. Giving birth, for instance, can cause depression. So
Yeah.
post delivery depression is a significant issue, and many pediatricians and family practice and GYN people, OBGYNs, will screen for that after the delivery, before and after the delivery, to make sure that had. And when that's
Mm-hmm.
treated, that's very, very important, because what happens to the mom often will happen to the baby. When the mom's not interested, can't really kind of, really get involved with the care of the baby will
Mm-hmm.
not, be able to do the same.
Thrive.
And so, yeah, exactly. So it's
Mm.
important that be identified. And then there's things like loneliness, like older people, for instance, and we're getting a little far from peds, but loneliness can be a huge problem with the onset of depression. Say our older folk that live alone, so we need to go out and make sure that everybody gets that door knocked on, and somebody to come by and visit, speaking to them, keep them active in the community as long as
Yes,
possible,
yes, yes,
stuff like that.
yes.
And
I
so,
agree. I agree
so,
with that
but that
100%.
is Yeah, but that's a very significant issue. The other one, alcohol and drug use can certainly lead to depression
Oh
and
yeah.
illness, and illnesses
Yeah.
like thyroid disease, for instance, and screening for thyroid disease, especially in young women who present with depression, should be on the top of your list to make sure
Okay.
that that's not.
Okay.
And you look at thyroid disease, that's also very familial. So those two things. So if mom's had a problem with hypothyroidism, then the kids should be screened for that, especially young
Hereditary.
women. Yeah, it's very
Okay.
ready.
Okay.
So watch it. The signs are feeling of emptiness and sadness, reduced interest in activities, lack of energy and fatigue, irritability. Especially when we talk about teens, that why you take something to Sally and you
Yeah,
wonder
just
what's
blow
going on
up,
here. Yeah,
blows up. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Pain and physical changes can be signs of that. I can tell you when school opens, I get a litany of abdominal pain complaints, every time. But that's certainly something to look at. Increased or
Ah.
decreased appetite can certainly be associated with it, and
Uh-huh.
loss of concentration, poor school performance, and employment issues can arise. So that can cost you your job, and of course, when you lose your job, lots of things happen down the line. So it can affect a
Mhm.
family significantly. And
Yeah.
also, not to be the last, but suicidal ideations, and
Mm.
the possibility of death associated with the self-inflicted injuries, or even hurting someone else.
Yeah, those
Does that
numbers are
also?
going up in the teens though. The cutters is increasing though. I've been seeing that lately. Teens are cutting more to release their,
Right,
they tell me it makes them they able to deal with or cope with whatever's going on. And
right.
they are committing suicide. I hate to admit it. The numbers are there. They're committing suicide. It used to be that the elderly were committing suicide more, but now I think it's neck and neck. The
Yeah,
teens are
but
creating.
yeah, well, there's a lot of stress. That this we just talked about stressful. This just
Yeah.
and things like the internet and all the things they can see on TV. I think the
Mhm.
lack of, how do you want to put it? I would say community and even national concern
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
from one another. Because I mean, all the discord that we see between this stripe and that stripe, you got to remember, you got these kids looking at this. This is what they see, because people say, kids are going to do what they see. They're not. You can say
That's
whatever you
true.
want,
That's
but
true.
they can see how stressful things are. And so you're putting somebody who does not have control of their lives, in a situation where they have to kind of be, battled back and forth in this.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a lot of stressful things that are going on. I mean, because I think we don't look at school as a job, but it kind of is if you want to think of it. And I read one article the other day. It says it's and really uncompensated, because they don't get paid for going to school. And so
Mm-mm.
so it's one of those issues where you got somebody who's just not in control, having to deal with all these different influences. One says this, one says that. You got this on the internet, you got that online, you got this on Facebook, and then what are these kids to think when you got all that input? And
That's too
our
much
community,
stimuli. That's too much stimulation.
right? And
It
our
really
community,
is.
yeah, and our community needs to understand that we need to pull together, and so that, because I remember when I was growing up, I lived on a street in Washington D.C., and
Mm-hmm.
everybody on that street knew each other, and
Come on.
they took care of each other. And I had those people that would sit at home in those windows, and if Vernon went out and did something, my mom knew before she got there, and I knew
Yep.
I was in trouble. So
Yep.
but you had to have stuff like that. You had to have some rules, but you also had to have a larger group of people to kind of do it. So like I said, does take a village, and for some of these mental health issues, I think if we acted more like that, like every kid mattered, I
Yeah.
think that would change the way we look at things. But that is a real big issue. So, and the cutting comes along with
Mm.
that stress. It just releases. They feel that it releases the stress and allows them to
Mm.
flow a little bit better. But it's obviously very dangerous and can lead
Yeah.
to more serious things like like suicide. And when I see it, it just makes it makes your my skin crawl. And I know that
Yeah.
this child's in distress, and we need to
Yeah.
get something done.
It breaks
So
your heart. It really breaks your
right,
heart. It
right,
does.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Well, I
treatment.
mean,
Okay,
mm,
treatment. counseling, and the most common thing is going to be psychotherapy,
Mm-hmm.
or versions of that. And when you think of psychotherapy, you think of somebody laying on a couch and they're talking, and
Mm-hmm.
you're working on this or that, and you're talking about what dad did and mom did, and all those things. Because the old standard treatment was, it was thought to be that you had all these unconscious things that were kind of beating you up that caused the problems. But I think some of the newer theories now kind of change that a little bit. But it's still a classic thing that you'll go to a therapist, and you'll just talk and try to work your way through stuff. But now that we
Mm-hmm.
got this newer form of it, it's called cognitive behavioral therapy,
Yep.
which is out there, and that seems to be a little different, where it really kind of acknowledges the fact that a lot of these things aren't unconscious; they're in your face. When somebody, when you're afraid of something, say for instance, you're depressed about your job or something, and you have to go every day, people develop sort of symptoms to kind of offset that, and those symptoms or the signs that they have are maladaptive. They cause you to have distress, and so it makes you not, when you go to work, not work well, because you don't talk to people at the same ability. You don't get enough work done because it's hard for you to concentrate and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. And so all those maladaptive things can get you further into trouble. And the more trouble you get into, worse depression you get. And so cognitive behavioral therapy, I guess in my sense, what that does is addresses those behaviors that cause the problems, and come up with some ideas of ways to make it positive. How do you get around this? How do you do better in
Mm-hmm.
that situation? So
Mm-hmm.
when this happens, don't go do the bad stuff that makes you worse. Do this instead, and
Mm-hmm.
that seems to help a lot of people. So that's one of the newer things that's out there. Most physicians are not trained in that, and so we don't really participate a lot. And I wish we had, but that's something that's probably for the specifics for people who are trained in psychiatry. I'm quite sure they're pretty adept at that. But we refer people for cognitive behavioral therapy, and there's also a different type called DPT, which I'm not as familiar with, which also it's stated to be very effective too.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course there's medication,
Mm-hmm.
which I do participate in the use of, because
Mm-hmm.
often what I find is when I get kids, I'll refer them initially for counseling or psychotherapy. But sometimes, especially if the kids are depressed, they're so depressed or so anxious, okay, we're talking about that they can't participate. And so often medication may be appropriate, or I'll get a referral from the counselor or psychiatrist, or not psychiatrist necessarily, but psychologist, that this person would benefit from medications. And so medication, the only medication that's approved for use in my age group is fluoxetine, which is the old medicine called Prozac. Um,
Uh-huh.
okay, but there are other medicines that are used off label. There are a slew of them. And
Mm-hmm.
a person who works with children on a regular basis would be adapted, being able to find a drug that might fit that
Mm-hmm.
particular
Mm-hmm.
person's
Mm-hmm.
problem. But Prozac is the only FDA approved drug for the kids between about 6 and 18.
Okay.
Do you have any questions on that one, or?
No, that one I'm pretty much understand that one pretty good. It is used. They got a generic Gufferson. I think I might be pronouncing it, for intuitive, the mood, the extended
Mm,
care, the mood
mm,
stabilizers they have.
mm,
They
mm,
seem to work pretty much in most of the children. It's another one I'm trying to think of, starts with the C,
mm,
Constantine, but it makes their stomach
mm,
irritated a lot. That depression kind of throws me a little bit, because I've seen them won't get out of the bed, put the
mm,
cover over their head like they're hiding, and I
mm,
irritate them and say, I can still see you. You haven't turned invisible. I'm looking at you, to make them laugh, in order to get conversation going.
mm,
But
mm.
yeah, I'm pretty good with that. It's just, if we see these signs and you have the child on medication, what else could we do besides getting them a counselor if they don't feel comfortable talking to mom, or they don't feel comfortable talking to a youth support specialist, if they don't feel comfortable What else would how else would you deal with it if you can't get your child out the bed and they don't want to move?
Well, hospitalization and is one option. I mean, we don't do that as often. There are probably a few we'll call outpatient services that
Mm-hmm.
centers and stuff. The older they get, you might be able to almost like we'll call them halfway houses, so to speak,
Oh,
where
like a
they
in
could,
treatment, like a long
yeah,
term?
they could do outpatient, and they do that daily or something like that. But in our
Mm-hmm.
area, we really don't have a lot of options when it comes to either
Wow.
they're going to be on counseling, they're going to be on meds, or they're going to be in the hospital. Um, uh, uh,
And if they don't get any of that, they're gonna end up in jail.
Unfortunately, that is the case. Yeah,
That's the end result. And they don't have any good therapy there, but that's what's gonna happen because they're gonna start acting out, or if they get into a manic state,
yeah. That can be a problem. Yeah,
that's gonna
yeah.
be a
But
problem.
but I think when you look at it long term,
Mm-hmm.
instead of increasing the services that we had available, because like I said, if this was 30 years ago, we'd have plenty of child psychiatrists available, or at least people who were doing psychiatry
Mm-hmm.
available. But that
Mm-hmm.
all went away with managed care, like I think I talked to you before about. And the number of people that can provide those services is decreased. We have a number of newer groups like licensed social workers, and there's a whole
Right.
cadre of people with master's degree levels that are doing that work, that are skilled in CBT and that the CBT, the DBT, I guess it is, and
Mm-hmm.
other forms of treatment. But it does reduce the options you have, because
Okay.
it would be nice to be able to have everybody on that same schedule, or have a group of people like a team that
Mm-hmm.
could do all those things. Because where I'm limited is that there's certain drugs that simply I just don't use, like the mood stabilizers and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't use on a regular basis. I'm more likely to use that group of, especially the drugs that are more considered, we'll call them, oh gosh, I forgot the name of this stuff now. But the drugs are like Risperdal, Abilify.
Yeah.
Um, they all
The
fall into,
common ones.
yeah, that are more commonly used for sort of a psychotherapy
Mm-hmm.
medication, we'll call it. We'll use those drugs only for kids who are autistic, but they can be used for kids who have mood disorders and
Uh-huh.
other things. But most pediatricians, again, are just simply, that's just not the purview yet. I think
Right.
along over time that'll happen. But I think mainly because I was reading an article today, because that's what we're seeing, and there's nobody else to see them, and
Right.
people are going to simply have to become more comfortable with the use of the drugs. The other thing is that we sometimes I get a lot of pushback from insurance companies that want to regulate the use of the drugs to only certain degrees. So, for instance, a psychiatrist can use this drug, but a pediatrician can't. But I
Wow.
can't get a child in to see a psychiatrist for 6 months. So, what is this kid going to do for 6 months? While he waits to see this other person.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a problem too. The problem we have there is that it would be nice to say that they're looking at this from the standpoint of safety for the child, but most of it's just money. They're worried about the cost of the drug and not really the safety of the kid. And I hate to be blatant about it, but that sometimes can be a problem too. They also could, if people were really interested, they simply allow people, like I've advocated for years, to simply allow physicians or other people to take mini rotations for like 3 or 4 months and get a master's in treatment, like for psychology or psychiatry, and just get a mini
Mm-hmm.
rotation in that. Pretty much the same as you'll get in medical school. You get it 3 months on a service. So it wouldn't be a huge thing, but when that person comes out, he'd be much better attuned to being able to handle those situations.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways that it can be done. It's just that we're so regimented on doing it a certain way, we can't kind of quite get out of the rhythm that we're in right now. But there's some options out there. But treatment at this point is still not optimum, and
Let
one of
me
it's
ask you
because of
this.
work. Hmm?
Would you be able to, like, if you could prove to the powers that be that they're still
Hmm?
making the same amount of money with that
Hmm?
rotation and in order to push it that way? would be something to do it like that, or to formulate a plan on that scale?
Well, it could be done. I mean, what they do is that you could certainly build that into the state or either federal program. And the answer is that you're not going to save any money. You simply are simply going to have a better and
Or
healthier.
reallocate a portion for that, more
Yeah,
or less.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you're
because it's
allocating it
needed.
now. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
that's
going
what
to.
I'm
Yeah,
saying. So what's one more thing? What's
yeah,
one
yeah.
more project? What's one more? I didn't realize, well, I do understand that being poor is big business. That's how I look at it. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it starts, it's a system. Like you said,
Mm-hmm.
the pharmaceutical, it's a system. You already got money. You had, can you go back and repeat that just in case someone didn't hear it from the first show? You were talking about the insurance that they set up for the vaccine. If someone um, filed against it because I might not be wording it right, but I
Right.
remember what you said.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a national vaccine act that was passed in this was back in the late '80s, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was that because the pharmaceutical companies were being sued on a regular basis because people would get sick, what they thought were illnesses associated with the vaccine. The most
Uh-huh.
common ones were the kids who were born with cerebral palsy. There was this idea that the vaccine itself caused cerebral palsy, and so of course you can imagine the number of people that have that disorder. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
little number. It's not huge either, but we're talking still a significant number. And so these companies were being sued on a regular basis. The problem was is that the data was wrong.
Okay.
Cerebral palsy is not caused by a vaccine. It's caused by intrauterine problems that occur during the pregnancy and has
Mm.
nothing to do with the vaccines. And so these kids, when they come, often you can't pick up the deficiencies until the kids get older, especially after 6 to 12 months. And so when you find that they aren't talking, they don't have good motor control, they do start to
Mm.
have seizures and stuff like that. But that's also,
Mm.
you've got to remember, temporally, you're getting vaccines at the same time. So what parents saw was that at 6 months, I got this shot, and at 9 months, my kid showed these factors. And so it must mean that when I got the shot, it caused this problem. And when they went to court, they were winning these because people looked at this kid and they said, "Oh my God, look at what happened. Who's going to take care of this?" And
Right,
so,
right.
the vaccine companies literally pulled out. They stopped making vaccines here in the United States. They simply said, "Nope, we've had it, and we're going to just get out." And eventually ended up with national legislation. It's called the National Vaccine Fund Injury Compensation Program. That's
Okay.
the name of it,
Okay.
and it's and the national and the part that has the fund is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 19. This was in 1986. Okay, and so I think that the key there is that and what they thought was that when they passed this, which gave them limited liability, so that
Mm-hmm.
when you make the vaccine, you couldn't get sued. You had to take all of your complaints to this compensation program. Well, like I said,
Okay.
people thought this thing would be out of business in 2 weeks because there'd be so many lawsuits. Well, it's a no fault system. So if you come in and you have a specific injury that's related to vaccines, you will get paid. Simple. No lawyers. You don't even have to have a lawyer. You can go in, you file the claim. If they find it's related, you get paid, and that's the end of it. No litigation.
Okay. Okay.
And
Got you.
so what happened was that the vaccine companies came back. They started making vaccines again. They improved the vaccines that they had because they did cause certain problems, especially with fever and illness after the vaccines, because the vaccines were just like cars. Over time, you can make them better and better once you figure out what issues you want to make better, so to speak,
Okay.
and need to be improved. So this vaccine act, it's still present. Every vaccine I give has a tax, where most of them have a tax that's attached to it of a couple dollars that's paid into this fund, so that everybody is able to participate if you have a problem. Now, the nice part of this is that over the years that fund has just become a huge amount of extra money that just sits there. Because what we found, and as we know now, is that the vaccines are relatively safe, and given a fair share, so to speak, that they could go out and improve themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We found that wasn't really the problem, and so that money is right now being probably paying off the national debt, or a part of it. You would borrow money from it, literally borrow money from it in order to fund the government, you know.
Okay.
But it is there. So for people who do have problems or think they have had problems associated with a vaccine, do have a resource and
Okay.
an ability to be made whole if a vaccine causes an injury. And
Okay.
again, what we found is that vaccines are safe. They do what they're supposed to do. They're not
Mm-hmm.
absolute. Nothing's absolute.
Of
There are going to be
course.
some injuries. And if you are injured, then you will be compensated. No fuss.
That's awesome to know. I would have never known that. I appreciate that information. One
Mm-hmm.
last question before we wrap up. What about obesity? I
Okay.
remember the day you see little babies when they're nice and fat, you'd be like, oh, that's my baby.
Mm-hmm.
You like the
Yeah.
little chunky
Yeah.
monkeys. And
Well,
now they looking thin.
yeah. Well, I think what we found is that, it's okay to be a chunky baby. I mean, I love them too.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, the chunky adults and older children have problems, and
Yes,
those
yes,
problems
yes.
can be an issue, especially with malfunctions in the body. So obesity has its own sort of chemistry that can cause
Okay.
problems. The most common things that we see, and I think if we're talking to really adults, is that it's hypertension and diabetes are two, and it just
Mm,
cardiovascular disease in general are the big issues, or the big boo-boos in the room when it comes to obesity. For children, I tell most of the kids early on the biggest single problem they're probably going to have is just their ability to get around. The other thing is back to that bullying thing again. Kids who are larger often end up in that role of being talked down at to, or felt to be not
mm-hmm.
feeling it to be good, so to speak. So that can be a problem, but they also develop problems early on, occasionally with hypertension and illnesses that are consistent with a pre-diabetic state. Especially something we call insulin resistance. I see that very common, where the pancreas is
Wow.
working and let me we'll talk about insulin resistance, which is probably what we see more commonly in children than even pre-diabetes or diabetes. And what happens is that we all come with a capacity, our organs come with a capacity to make and work at a certain rate for a long time. But it's finite. When you're born, you got 5 billion repetitions for your heart, and that's it. That's it. You're done. Now, if you do all those 5 billion in 2.5 years, well, bye-bye. You're done,
Wow.
So the idea is that you need to parcel that out over a long period of time. So you want your organs to kind of pace themselves. And so when we find somebody who becomes very large, the pancreas isn't going to get any bigger than it was supposed to get. But if you get a lot larger than you're supposed to get, then in order to keep your blood sugar normal, the pancreas has to crank out way more insulin than it normally would. And it's sort of like I tell kids, it's like having a little engine in a big old truck. You can imagine what's going to happen to that engine
Mm-hmm.
after, you might get 1,000,000 miles on a large engine, but you might only get 250 with the smaller one, And so the key thing is that what we try to do is get kids to understand that they need to moderate their size so that they can make sure that those organs last a lifetime. And so one of the things that we talk about mostly on that is to try to get them to increase their activity level so that they can burn up those calories. And we want them to watch what they eat. And what I tell them often is that I'm a big kind of carb buster, and I tell them that bread, pasta, rice, and potatoes, got to eat a little bit less of that. Didn't say you couldn't eat any, but just kind of watch your intake, because that's where a lot of the problems we run into. If your diet's heavy in those, you're going to put on weight at a little easier, at a faster rate. Because when your body takes in carbohydrates and you can't utilize them immediately, what happens is that your body either will make protein with it, which if you're making muscle or something like that, that's good. But what happens with the rest of it? You simply make fat with it immediately. So if you go out and drink a 16-ounce soda, that's more sugar than you need all day. And so
Wow.
So where does the rest of it go? To fat. Just simply, there's no place else for it to go. You can't keep it in the body because it has to be held in solution. And in order to keep it in solution, we'd be big as a Mack truck in order to keep that water, to keep it in a solution that's safe enough for the rest of the body. So the body just cranks out, it goes to the liver cranks out some more fat, and it gets off to the stores, fat stores, and that's it. And I tell people all the time, I think about the missile crisis. And most of us think about the Cuban Missile Crisis from the standpoint of, in 1963, all this happened. But what I remember more so is that that's immediately when real sugar came out of the sodas, and corn syrup went into sodas. Cane sugar is metabolized differently, and so you didn't see as much obesity and stuff like that when you had that. But if you look at a graph started in 1963, and when corn syrup was introduced in the United States as the main sweetener in products like soda pop and stuff like that, that graph just simply goes right up. It just goes this way, and it's still going up. It's a huge.
So that and fruit, what do they call that fruit? This other fructose?
Yeah.
How does, okay, so is that an artificial sweetener?
It's not an artificial sweetener. They're natural products that can be made. You can make them pure. And that's one of the problems with processed foods, is that you get an immediate bang for bucks. The problem is that you don't need a lot of that immediately. What you need is a small amount over a longer period of time. So it's better to, like I say, it's like when you tell parents about juice, for instance, it's okay potentially for them to drink juice, but in very small amounts. But if you eat the fruit, you get the juice, but it's absorbed very slowly. So the body has to break it down. So you get a little bit at a time. When you drink a soda pop, you get instant sugar, just like that. And that's the problem we have with artificial sweeteners like corn syrup and stuff like that, like fructose and stuff like that. You just can't use it all at one time. You take too much of it in. So it's better to eat. So if you want pineapple juice, eat the pineapple. If you want apple, eat the apple. Or pear juice, eat the pear. Eat a couple pears if you wanted to. You won't get nearly as much sugar. And a lot of it is still good, especially when you eat the fruit. The fiber helps with everything else in your digestion, you know. And so it's important that we watch out for things like processed foods, and that's a whole nother topic that can cause problems with in the body. So so you want to increase activity, watch their diet, and in general try to keep them aware of teaching them how to eat themselves, because one of the problems is that once these kids get over 3 or 4, you can start to tell them about what good food is and what they should eat and what they shouldn't eat, how much they should, and stuff like that. And don't be afraid to tell your child no. You know, there's a limit to everything, and so there's no unlimited food. It's like when I get a parent who they get 6 to 8 bottles of formula a day. I mean, they were happy, but also now all of a sudden, instead of gaining 1.5 pounds a month, they're gaining 3 pounds a month. That's not healthy for the child, you know. So the key is the same thing, and it's no different for a 5-year-old or a 3-year-old or an 8-year-old. They're going to go through periods where they have rapid growth, and they should be given the calories they need. But on a regular basis, you still need to have a governor on that, so that you know that they're taking in a certain amount, because that has a lot to do with their long-term health as far as weight gain and stuff like that, and what their self-concept is as well, you know, who they are, what they want to look like and stuff like that.
What about the 3-year-old who only want to drink milk all day long? They could drink, I know a particular child, that child could drink maybe 8 glasses of milk a day if you let them.
Yeah.
You know, they'll eat very little vegetables, maybe 1 or 2 peas, or, you know, but milk, they just want milk. And they are active. They jumping around off the couch. They just terrorizing the house. They're very active people, but milk is their go-to. Or what about the child who only wants to eat a hamburger?
Yeah, same. You have to learn. I think that comes down to what we talked about, is that parents have to be in control of what their kids eat.
Okay.
And so my idea on that, and I might be really old school, but
that's
the answer is that you're the mama, you're the daddy. You tell your kids what they need to do and what they need to eat. And you provide the food. Nobody goes out and buys the kids at 3 years old don't go out and buy potato chips, you know.
Come on.
So you know if they're getting too much milk or too much of this, it's the parents are supplying it. You just simply have to put governors on those, and that means there are limits to what you want to feed them. So typically at the age of 3, they get no more than 24 ounces of milk a day, and if they were a little chunky, we'd even do 2% milk, you know. And occasionally there are a few people who go to 1%, although I can't say how people drink that. Sorry.
That's just water. Pour your glass of water and put you some white dye in it.
Yeah. But it's okay. And I tell parents that all the time. It's okay to say no. There's nothing wrong with putting limits on stuff. That's how kids learn, you know.
Yes.
And when you want them to be good adults, you want them to say no. The light's red. I'm gonna stop, you know. And if you don't start putting some of those lights up and having them respect those, then they that's what they learn. They learn that you ignore all those other signals. So when my belly says I'm full, you just keep eating, you know. And so that's the way I would think of it. That way, we have to be able to do that, and do the parenting. And sometimes parenting is hard, you know. And I have no problem. I understand that sometimes it's difficult to tell. You know, my kid says he's hungry. Well, he just ate 2 hamburgers and a bag of fries and 2 sodas, and he's still hungry.
Oh my God, he needs a job.
but it's okay to say no. You've had enough, you know, and stuff like that. So it's just a classic issue there of, I think sometimes making sure those parents put the governors on and do the control on that. Now I'm going to briefly go over a couple other things on obesity. There's some medications out there that they've approved for children who are obese. There's 3 of them that are available, and apparently, looking at in one of the articles I reviewed, they're going to have up to 5 new drugs that are available to treat children's obesity. So there are some medications that are possible. If you use the medications, what they suggest is that you get about a 3 to 6% improvement in weight loss and stuff like that, which isn't huge, but over a long term, if you can keep the weight down early, then it's probably okay. There's some newer ones that are on the horizon that will improve that to about a 15% average, 15% weight loss that are coming up in the future. And for adults, there are about 7 different medications that are available currently now, already available to use for weight loss. The other option that you have is something called bariatric surgery, which is obviously, when I say surgery, a lot more in detail. And there are 2 types of interventions there. And that is it's something called a sleeve gastrectomy, where they literally take 80, I guess up to almost 75 to 80% of the stomach and make just a sleeve instead of a big stomach pouch. And so you obviously have less space in there to be able to break food down and store it. And then there's a one called gastric bypass, where they actually divide the stomach up into 2 parts and only have the one part attached to the intestines. And so you keep most of the stomach there in order to get the enzymes and other things that you need and hormones there. But you only attach a certain part of it that actually is going to do the digestive part of it. And those 2 surgeries together are very effective. And you get up to about a 35% weight loss with that. And it's consistent, not that little bit here, a little bit. You get probably about a third. And so it's life-changing, but it also is body changing. So you have to, it's a form of surgery that's, you know, once you do it, it's done. And so that's not something you would casually kind of walk into, but there are conditions and occasions where that may be a significant issue, especially, say, for instance, I would do, say somebody who's a 400-pound, 14-year-old that's got diabetes and hypertension that's out of control. Yeah, I mean, this is a really,
that's life-threatening. Sounds like they could die.
Right, exactly. And so a surgery for something like that might be certainly appropriate. And so, so it's not for somebody who's just like, I'm overweight, I just want to get the surgery, you know, because at 14, I'm not sure at that point that person has enough ability to project that what's going to happen to them 30 years from there after they've altered their body. So that's something you really have to think about. And with
Mm-hmm.
medication, on the other side of that, on medication, there are obviously side effects to every medicine that you take. They're not necessarily life altering things, but there are issues there. We don't know the long-term effects of them either, and because they're all fairly new entities that are coming to the market. But it is something that we have to think of it. And I read this article, and what jumped out at me is that obesity is not a life choice. It's a medical problem. It's
Mm.
got biology, and that biology can be altered, either good or bad. With the medications and with the surgery, it alters that biology to make it so that the person's better. But the idea of the article was that it's not a life choice, because some people look at it and say this person's overweight because they don't care. They're just just doing this thing because. But believe me, I know personally that many of these kids who are obese, that's not the condition they want to be in. But sometimes either genetically they're just so predisposed to it, or if it's culturally or environmentally they are put in that situation and get there. It's not always, I hate to say, their fault.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and you
And
can't,
they're eating the fast food because it's cheaper. They can get a hamburger for $1,
right,
which is not, I don't even know what them hamburgers is made out of, but
right, right.
anyway, they're getting a hamburger for $1. A pound of apples is almost $3 a pound, and you got 5 kids, so you're not going to spend $15 on apples for 5 kids. You know what I'm saying? So economically, yeah, I can see it's not their fault.
Yeah,
Not a
and
good choice, but not their fault. I get it.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And so
I
again,
get
it's
it.
not. Yeah, and so the key there is if that's the case, we need to be a little bit more involved with actively with the looking at options for treatment for people who come in
Mm-hmm.
who want to improve the situation, so to speak, for or obesity, or if you find that they again like they have diabetes or something like that, to make sure that this person is made as healthy as possible. The other thing is to take away the stigma of obesity, because that is a huge issue that I run into.
Yes.
And I also read another article, and the guy was consistent about literally not putting the weight on the chart.
Mm-hmm.
Don't even put it on the chart. Just you can talk about weight issues, but don't use that as a instrument, so to speak,
Wow.
sort of as an indictment, so to speak. Oh, you weigh 300 pounds today. Let's talk about that, Joey. Well, once you put that number
On
out
the
there
table.
on the
Yeah.
table, it just kind of blows,
Mm-hmm.
the person's so
Yeah.
so one of the options that they had is just simply just don't look at it as an absolute, to look at it as a way of addressing the fact that it is 300 pounds, but you're going to address it based just on that. How do we work with this? We obviously know, you obviously know, I obviously know
Mm-hmm.
that there's an
Mm-hmm.
issue, but how do we
Mm-hmm.
kind of work with this? And it'll, because I know I've seen parents, you say the word obesity and people just they look at you, it's not a great term, because I think it just has so many negative connotations. We need to look at other ways of being
Yeah.
able to get our point across without injuring people, and stuff
Let,
like that.
let me ask you this. Do you explain to the parents about food choices or the food groups, or do you refer them to a dietitian, or you give them information? I know that's not your job per se within your
Mm-hmm.
scope, but you're talking about it, and
Yeah,
what I'm not trying to get into your
yeah.
practice, but what would be the best thing from your viewpoint to handle that situation?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to put the person at ease, let them know that I'm not being judgmental about
Okay.
their weight, and to try to get them so that we're talking. Because once I say obesity or some,
Right. That's a bad
people,
word. Mm-hmm.
well, the guard goes up.
Right.
I don't want to get
Right.
injured. I don't want I got self-esteem, and stuff like that. So I need to find a way to politely get into that scenario where we can talk about the issue of weight and still be comfortable with it. And so, and
Mm-hmm.
I just have to find where that is. And so so that's the first thing, is that we need to be able to talk about it and be able to decide, and both of us agree, and we try to agree that it is an issue that you want to work on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
just me telling you that isn't gonna get anything done. I have to
Right.
have them buy into this because it's important to them. not to
Okay.
me necessarily, but it has to be something that's important to them. And when I see that, when I get that bite, when I see kids, and you can look at their face and it registers that it's on me, they bite it, they'll take it to heart. And the same thing with the parents, because you got to get them aligned with that. Because often it's not
Yes.
just that person who's eating differently, it's a whole household. you know
Yes. Yes.
so you
Yes.
got to deal.
Yes.
So it's not just that kid. So that's the first thing, is that we got to be able to talk about it and stuff like that. And once we get to that point, I talk about options or lifestyle changes like activity and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then we get through all that. There are some that we refer on to nutritionalists. The problem we have with that is that we used to have community people that we could do that, or hospital. That's been very difficult to get. There are a few children's hospitals, like in our case, Children's Mercy Hospital here in Kansas City does have a program and weight management that we can refer to. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
generally where we refer.
I understand.
Yeah. But what I have found it works the best, though, is simply allowing them to come to, as they say, come to Jesus moment on their own, where they realize that what I'm telling them is not something that's going to hurt them, but something that's going to help them. And they have to figure out a way to kind of work at it. And I give them options and let them work at it. I've been really amazed that they come back the next year, because we see them yearly for physical, and they come back and their weight sometimes it drops,
Awesome.
but often it goes back down to normal again. And I asked them what they did. Was that, we did this, but often it's the whole family. But often what I can see is if I can get the kids that are over 5 or 6 to buy into it, they're happier. Everybody's happier. But it's important that that there's a dialogue there and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other
Mm-hmm.
thing. And the other thing I would like to see is if schools provided more nutritional support, not just food, but talked about it as a course like in school. So every year you had something that talked to you about what good basic nutrition is, and demystify this this thing, because there are a lot of things in medicine that you can prevent simply by educating people early. And so talking about healthcare from the time that they're in kindergarten to the time they graduate from high school, or even into college, on a regular basis, yearly, having some type of program that talks about what good healthcare looks like for them.
Yes.
Talking about vaccines, talking about like gun safety, talking about all those things that, riding a bike, wearing a helmet. Well, we can talk about that, but why couldn't that be part of your general education process of understanding that once you learn how to do something, then and in Black communities, teaching kids how to swim, so we don't have all these drownings.
Yeah. Oh, come on, doctor. You're talking real good this morning. That's I know that I've been on that side. After I had personally witnessed my kids, the son had fell in the pool and I didn't know how to swim. And I was just devastated. And thank God the people we were with were able to get him in immediately. Everybody went to learn to swim except for me. But I'm next.
Okay, all right.
But they can swim and they're grown now, so they're good. They're good.
Yeah, well, you know personally what I'm talking about. And so,
I do. And it's the most frightening thing ever to see your child in the water and you're going to die too in order to save them. So I couldn't jump in because I still had another child and who would be there for her. So it was horrible. You just don't want to experience that. You just don't.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that you could do in many. I remember in high school, our high school had a pool. There's no reason that they can't be taught to swim in school.
But a lot of them don't. But a lot of them don't, or they don't have access to it. And so then you got to go back to the why, and the why is not cheap like it used to be. And it's just, I mean, everything is just, you really have to look for resources now to be parenting. Parenting is a full-time job that people don't realize. It really, really is. It's not a hobby. It's not something you can squeeze in 2 hours. But unfortunately, we're living in a society where we've got to get that balance and get our priorities straight. And your family should be a priority.
Yeah. Well, I think that is an appropriate way to look at it. Is that I've always looked at it from the standpoint of every conversation I have with an official, we know what we're supposed to be able to do. And we also know how much it probably costs.
Mm-hmm.
Often what happens is that we're never given that opportunity to decide what those priorities are. They often tell us
Yes.
what those priorities are, is that
After the fact.
building new roads and making sure you got new businesses and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what always should be first is exactly what comes first to them is their families. And if we looked at that and made sure that what was good for my family is good for your family, we'd all be better off.
We would be, but that goes that sense of community that we had experienced that we grew up with.
we've got
Everybody knew who, oh, you them young girls, aren't you them young girls? Yeah, you look like them young girls. Okay, I know your mama. We gonna have a talk with her. Uh-huh. What you doing down here?
yeah. It's perfectly appropriate, and
Mm-hmm.
but I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important that we do that. So, all right. So,
Well, I just want to tell you again, wow, you are a wealth of information. That obesity, you really gave me an insight on that and other things. But I just want to recap. I thank you, Dr. Vernon Mills. If anybody, you want to go ahead and let everybody again know where you are for the people who do see this in Leavenworth who don't know you, but I'm sure that they do. But I want to make sure that they can reach you. Can you give everybody else your location again, Doc, please?
okay. I'm in Leavenworth, Kansas. You
Mm-hmm.
can reach me at I'm at 3500 South 4th Street in good old Leavenworth County, a little Leavenworth City itself. And if you have any questions or anything like that, you can certainly reach out to me through. I got an email address, but it just
Yeah.
I think it's well, I'm not sure what it is because we just changed it. So we had the same one for 30 years, and then and we changed it, and so I don't remember what it is. But
Okay, that's cool.
you can certainly reach me by phone
Well,
at
they can Google you, and
yeah,
then
or
they
they
can
can
go.
Google me.
They can
Yeah,
Google you after they Google. Trust me, they can
you can
Google
get it
you
that
after
way.
they Google
Yep.
you. They can find the number, and we can go from there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it was an honor and a privilege, and I just want to thank you so much for your time and definitely
Mhm.
your patience. God
Yeah.
bless you, and tell your wife I said hello. Bye
I
bye.
will. Thanks.
Okay.
Have a good day now.
Bye bye.
Bye
Uh-huh.
bye.
Bye. I love it.